Welcome to the first episode of the 2024 ICAS Experts Voices Initiative. My name is Yilun Zhang. I'm the Research Associate at the Institute for China-American Studies. And today it is our greatest honor to have Dr. Wu Shicun join us to discuss the U.S. China bilateral relationship, his recent experience at the Munich Security Conference, and recent development and the assessment of the South China Sea. Dr. Wu is the biggest boss of ICAS. He's the chairman of the advisory board of ICAS, and he's also the founding president of the National Institute for South China Sea Studies, and he's also the president of the newly founded Huaiyang Center for Maritime Cooperation and Ocean Governance. And you can find his full bio and his all the other publications on our website. Dr. Wu, thank you for joining us today. It is a great pleasure.
Thank you, Aaron. Nice to meet you on screen.
And also a happy Year of the Dragon.
Good.
So let's start with a brief assessment of the status quo of the U.S.-China relations then. There have been some very positive signals last year following the San Francisco summit. Are we expecting a rather stable period of the U.S.-China relationship in 2024, given the election coming? What are the various working groups' primary objectives for now? And where are the areas that we may actually see active engagement and potentially tangible outcome in 2024?
Very good question. Let's look at the engagement since the meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Biden. In my opinion, the significance of the meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden in San Francisco last year is that it has temporarily stabilized the China-U.S. relations, but it's hard to say how long that stability will last. However, it's true some mechanisms since that meeting for dialogue have begun to be resumed or activated. For instance, the meal-to-meal dialogue on maritime issues, or dialogue on economic and financial sectors. So those dialogues, I think, it's good for the relationship to be stabilized. And also, the momentum, in my opinion, so far so good. So I hope that it can be, this dialogue can be maintained.
So you just mentioned that there are things like military to military dialogues and the other type of things. These might be some pressing issues that the two sides need to reestablish dialogue and to resolve some of the pressing issues. Could you give us some more detailed information on what you assess as the pressing issue currently in the U.S.-China bilateral relationship? And, because it's not the first president. President Biden is not the first president that deal with a very tough U.S.-China bilateral relationship. What do you think is the long-standing issue in this bilateral relationship that it has put our bilateral relationship in a very difficult situation right now?
Yes. In my opinion, the long-term problem between China and the United States is, first of all, whether these two countries they can, find a way to live together peacefully. China, in my opinion, China cannot replace the United States. The United States cannot change China. So China and the United States, as the two big countries, two largest economies, do not have to deal with the impossible. So how to deal with the avoidance of conflict and confrontation is the two countries in strategic community to seek the answers. So that's why the meal-to-meal relationship is important. If we look at the South China Sea region, the interaction between China and the U.S., the two navies, how to avoid confrontation or potential crisis is important. So that's why the meeting between Xi Jinping and Biden last November in San Francisco, they try, to resume the talks between the two militaries.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. I think, yes, military to military dialogue to avoid close encounters that might actually eventually escalate into confrontation is important. And we'll get into South China Sea issue later. But let's talk about another flashing point in the U.S. China bilateral relationship for now, which is, a more recent event at the Taiwan regional election. Taiwan has always been a long-standing issue in the bilateral relationship. And Lai Ching-te won the election, and he's going to take the office in May. Is there anything that could happen around Taiwan this year? And, with pressing calls in the U.S. Congress and potentially among U.S. public to call for a clearer U.S. position and policy on Taiwan, do you think now that the two countries should really reestablish their principle and policies, get a clear understanding of where each other stands on the issue of Taiwan, and potentially for the better peaceful resolution of the issue of Taiwan for the future?
Okay, Taiwan issue is another bigger problem that affect the bilateral relations between China and United States. So how to manage this issue well, it will impact China-U.S. relations. So you just mentioned Mr. Lai Ching-te was elected as next Taiwan leader of Taiwan Authority. So in my opinion, cross-strait relations and Lai Ching-te will not be better than under Taiwan. It's my personal opinion. That's for sure. The likelihood of the situation in the Taiwan Strait deteriorating in the future is increasing. If the United States, continues to adopt a vague strategy on Taiwan issue, it's now, vague strategy on Taiwan issue is now U.S. policy towards the Taiwan issue. And the hollow out the one China policy, it will only send the wrong signals to Taiwan, leading Lai Ching-te's administration to adopt a desperate strategy and go further and further down the road to Taiwan independence, thus aggravating the risk of war. It's my personal opinion or prediction on Taiwan issue. So both China and United States should manage well Taiwan issue. It's so sensitive, so complicated. So if United States continues to hollow out the one China policy or adopt a vague strategy to Taiwan issue, I think there will be a big problem, since Lai Ching-te took his office of a Taiwan regional authority.
Let me just clarify one point. When you said that the U.S. is hollowing out the one China policy, are you saying that basically, even though the Biden administration has been repeatedly talking about that they still stand by the one China policy, but their action doesn't really fit what they're actually saying? Or are you saying that basically they don't really have any clarity to what that one China policy means?
It's if we look at what U.S. has been is with regard to Taiwan issues, saying one thing and doing another. So despite the United States still says that the United States will stick to one China policy. On the other hand, the relationship, high-level officials, interactions between Taiwan and the United States, and arms sales to Taiwan, or the initiative on the new bills or regulation of Taiwan issues. So those, actions or motives or behaviors, in my opinion, was to hollow out the one China policy that used to be U.S. policy towards the Taiwan issue.
And do you see is there any third-party countries that could potentially evolve and further complicate the issue of Taiwan, for example, EU or Japan, that following the U.S. actions that these countries would further voice up their concern about the issue of Taiwan and align their approach with the Americans?
I think so. If we look at both, Japan as U.S. allies or South Korea or some European countries, both those U.S. allies and partners will follow U.S. Policy towards Taiwan and hollow out one China policy like U.S. does. So that's a problem. So it's a big challenge facing in the future and letting this administration. So this year's Taiwan issue is, in my opinion, is a big challenge for us on how to manage well. So despite the U.S. says should China should keep the status quo to Taiwan Strait, but from U.S. perspective, no independence, nor unification would be in U.S. interests. So, in other words, the interests of the United States would be best served by no independence, no unification, or one political entity on either side with no affiliation to the other side. So that is the real strategy or real policy of the United States towards the Taiwan issue.
I see. It looks like 2024 is going to be a very colorful year. And speaking of being colorful, we have another drama here on the other side of the Pacific. Could you briefly tell us what you think about upcoming 2024 U.S. presidential election? How do you see that election going to affect U.S.-China relations? Do you see Biden or Trump? Is there any fundamental difference in their China policy or their approach to China? Or is there going to be any fundamental changes to the U.S.-China bilateral engagement following the result of the 2024 presidential election?
It's hard to say, or in other words, hard to predict who will be next president of the United States. In my opinion, it will make no difference to Taiwan issue, no matter who is the next president of the United States. Because, Taiwan issue is China's internal affair. China doesn't look to the United States for a solution of Taiwan issue. So if the United States continues to send a wrong signal to Taiwan, leading, letting this administration to adopt a separate strategy, moving toward the Taiwan independence. So they will aggravate the war, risk of war across the Taiwan Straits. So no matter who will be next president, so Taiwan issue is still there. Taiwan challenge is still there. So China and United States should work together and carefully to manage this well.
Let's move our perspective to something else then. Let's talk about your recent experience at the Munich Security Conference. There are a lot of publication came up after the Munich Security Conference, and you apparently have a lot of thoughts on this event. Tell us about your personal feeling first then. What was the atmosphere at Munich this year? Was it just like last year, where Ukraine still dominate all of those topics, and people point fingers at China as well? Or, is there any difference compared to, last year or the year before?
Well, this year's Munich Security Conference was my 5th time to attend this important event. Compared with the last year's Munich Security Conference, this year's MSC was not as heated as last year's discussion on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And the United States and the West no longer seem to be committed to a quick war, the Ukraine and the Russia war, and Ukraine will win. The fear that the results of U.S. presidential election and the European Parliament elections will affect the direction of the battlefield situation. Was a pessimistic atmosphere I felt at the Munich Security Conference. So in other words, last year, the main topic was about Russia-Ukraine war. But this time, this year's Munich Security Conference was no longer focused on the Russia-Ukraine war. So compare this year's Munich Security Conference with last year, that is the differences between the two events.
But besides the pessimism, what do you see, what about China? What are the main issues that people discuss about China during this year's MSC?
Unfortunately, China was not a main topic at this year's Munich Security Conference, despite Foreign Minister Wang Yi made a speech at a special session. Let me talk more about Wang Yi's speech at this year's special session on China. Wang Yi's speech actually was welcomed by this year's Munich Security Conference. How to that? I said, so Wang Yi's speech was welcomed as can be verified by both number of participants who attended the special session Wang Yi engaged, and also the reaction of the to Wang Yi's speech after the meeting. I discussed the Wang Yi speech after the meeting. Many specialists from either United States and European, they praised Wang Yi's speech. How to understand that? If we look at the Wang Yi speech, a very important revelation is that his speech echoed the international community's expectation of China, which is that in an international community full of uncertainty, China is always an important and a certain stabilizing force. So that is, this year's Munich Security Conference relating to China. Wang Yi, made a speech at the special session themed as China and the world. So I involved and enjoyed his speech and enjoyed the discussion on China with the participants from the West countries.
So you're saying that Foreign Minister Wang Yi basically showed China's commitment to help the world to resolve the challenges and be a responsible player and actor in the international society. And then how would you assess this current impasse between U.S. and China at some of the major multilateral platforms like the UN Security Council, that these two countries just cannot seem to work together to jointly resolve issues like Russia, Ukraine, or the ongoing war in Gaza?
I think so. China and the United States could work together on the platform and on the UN Security Council to solve either Ukraine war or Gaza problem or Gaza crisis. If we look at the statement issued by both Chinese Foreign Ministry and the U.S. State Department, Mr. Blinken and Mr. Wang Yi discussed the issue of on the sideline of Munich Security Conference on the issue of Ukraine war and Gaza crisis. So I do think both China, United States, and other the member of UN Security Councils to focus on resolve Ukraine war and the Gaza crisis as soon as possible.
I see. Since you mentioned Blinken, it seems that Secretary Blinken's comment that you either sit by the table or probably end up on the menu has drawn a lot of comments and criticism from China. Would you like to assess that? Do you think that statement is true, as some of the critics in China that said that Blinken is simply hinting at third-party countries that if you don't join the U.S. camp, you'll get eaten up?
Okay. I don't think that there is anything wrong with the statement made by Mr. Blinken. And in my opinion, it is misinterpretation of the domestic discussions on, to interpret the phrase, if you are not at the table, you will be on the menu. As if you don't eat others, you will be eaten by others. So my understanding is that in the arena of international affairs, if you do not have the strength or do not participate in the decision-making of international affairs, then your destiny is in the hands of others. I was present when Mr. Blinken made these remarks. He made them actually was a response to the foreign ministers of India and Germany. So his initial, in my opinion, his initial intention should have been that he hoped that the allies of the United States would take an active part in the international affairs led by United States. So it's my understanding to that statement.
Let's talk about those third-party countries. Do you see there some of these third-party countries' activities in the South China Sea also as a form of taking their destiny into their own hands? Because in your article to the Global Times, you mentioned that the South China Sea is frequently mentioned during this year's Munich Security Conference, and that many third-party countries, such as some of the EU members and Japan, have been very critical of China on this issue. Do you think it's their form of trying to sit by the table and take a fair share of their own? Or what do you think?
If we look at this year's Munich Conference topics, South China Sea was mentioned frequently, both at Wang Yi's session and Ambassador Hu Yin's session, and also a closed-door session I attend. Those sessions or workshops, South China Sea was main topics. In my opinion, the essence of the South China Sea issue is a territorial dispute over some of the islands and reefs of the Spratly Islands, or we call it the Nansa Islands, and a dispute over maritime jurisdiction. It only, exists between China and some South China Sea littoral states, and arises from the illegal occupation of these islands or reefs by countries, such as the Philippines, Vietnam, and other claimed countries, and their claim to excessive maritime jurisdiction in accordance with UNCLOS. So academic discussions South China Sea issue was like that I just mentioned, but in Munich Security Conference, most of participants or even West scholars do not know the details about South China Sea. So I just mentioned the essence of the South China Sea issue is a dispute over some islands and reefs in the Spratly and the maritime jurisdiction. So that is the core issue of South China Sea issue. So in recent years, the South China Sea issue has become, from Chinese perspective, internationalized and expanded. Why? Mainly due to the implementation of the U.S. return to the Asia-Pacific and the Asia-Pacific strategy, as well as the abandonment of a regional neutrality policy. U.S. used to adopt a neutral policy towards the South China Sea. But now no longer the case, the neutrality. So as allies of the United States, the European Union, you just mentioned, and Japan are dancing with the United States on the South China Sea issue. So that is extra regional countries now involved in South China Sea issue. So that's, makes it South China Sea to be complicated and sensitive and internationalized, expanded.
So you're basically saying that from its very origin, the South China Sea is supposed to be a territorial dispute among the claimant state in the region, but because of the U.S. newly adopted, not so newly, recently adopted Indo-Pacific strategy, that it has eventually evolved into a global power competition. And those extra regional countries, from your perspective, they don't really necessarily care about the dispute, but in fact actually care more about their own fair share in the region.
Right. That's right. So, outside the countries, particularly United States, Japan, Australia, and internal or inside countries, mainly the claimant states, particularly the Philippines, Vietnam, even Malaysia. So those, factors, mixed together, becomes a driving force of the South China Sea. Now, we found that it's coming warming and to be heated.
Then let's talk about the internal players a little bit then, because we actually see tension grow in the South China Sea, particularly during the end of last year, particularly around the second Thomas Shore, what the Chinese would call the Renaijiao. It has become a center of friction between China and Philippines, which is one of the regional claimants, but also a close U.S. ally. Do you think has the situation cooled down after all those clashes between Coast Guard ships, and then later on there was some warship involvement in the situation? Do you think that the situation has cooled down yet? And do you still see if there's any risk that the two sides or any interest party that need to solve this problem as soon as possible?
Okay, the second Thomas Shore or Renaijiao, let me tell you the truth. One of the reasons why the South China Sea issue has heated up since 2023 is the Philippines' Philippines attempted to permanently fortify and militarize the Renaijiao or second Thomas Shore in contravention of its commitment not to change the status quo of the reefs and the DOC rule, not to occupy the uninhabited islands and reefs. So the Philippines committed itself, there was a gentleman agreement between China and the Philippines in 1990s after the event of the confrontation between China and the Philippines on the second Thomas Shore. That is, Philippines promised to China not to permanently control or militarize or fortify the second Thomas Shore as a military basis. But now the Philippines violated its commitment. So that's the key issue.
Then we need to talk about the United States there, because now we're really seeing that the U.S. in a bit of a dilemma. On the one hand, well, despite the fact that you just said that the U.S. has abandoned its neutral position, but the U.S. still claimed that it's trying to stay neutral, does not take any part on the issue of the South China Sea. But in reality, as an ally of Philippines, the U.S. had to come in Philippines' aid if there are actually arms conflict between China and the Philippines. Do you see that as a potential outcome? What is the likelihood of the U.S. directly involving in the Chinese-Filipino dispute? As Manila eagerly expanding its cooperation with many countries in the Indo-Pacific regions, what Japan, Vietnam, Australia, Canada, etc., all of these U.S. partners and allies, is there any implications for all of these countries also getting dragged into the South China Sea as things heated up between China and Philippines over the second Thomas Shore?
U.S. involvement was another factor that is influence the South China Sea issue, particularly the second Thomas Stewart confrontation between China and the Philippines. On the one hand, United States stated that we, United States, still stick to a neutrality policy towards the South China Sea. On the other hand, United States, sending a signal to the Philippines, we will stand by if, China, bullying the Philippines, it will invoke the treaty between, a defense treaty between the Philippines and the United States. So double standards. So U.S. involvement or backup of the United States is another driving force behind the second Thomas Stewart confrontation between China and the Philippines. So in my opinion, how to manage the second Thomas Stewart confrontation well is the Philippines has to live up to its words and not to say one thing and do another, not to use the Philippine U.S. allies as a shield to strengthen its illegal maritime claims over the South China Sea islands or maritime jurisdiction. So both the United States and the Philippines should, manage well to avoid a potential conflict in the South China Sea region.
It seems like the managing third party will become an even bigger challenge for the U.S. and China then. So let's get back to the bilateral relationship and see how they manage their own bilateral relationship for now. You said that now we are seeing a window of opportunity between U.S. and China following the San Francisco meeting, and President Xi Jinping specifically said that he's inviting over 50,000 American teenagers to come visit China and study in China. It seems like following San Francisco that the two countries has prioritized people-to-people exchanges. And in many of your recent articles, you also call for increasing people-to-people exchanges, communications, dialogues between the two countries. And you specifically stress that the pressing need to promote track 2 dialogues between the two countries. What is the value of track 2 dialogue at this point of view?
Of course, track 2 dialogue, people-to-people exchanges are important between our two countries. So in my opinion, as far as China-US relations are concerned, it is impossible to have relatively stable China-US relations without extensive and effective think tank dialogues and people-to-people exchanges, especially against the backdrop of increased misunderstanding and miscalculation, intensified confrontation, and the suspension of most of the initial track 1 dialogues. Track 2 dialogues between China and the United States have become not only necessary, but also urgent. So that's why President Xi Jinping last November in San Francisco initiated to invite 50,000 young generations from the United States to visit China in the coming 5 years. So the value, in my opinion, of the track 2 dialogues lie in the fact that they can influence the decision-making and the direction of the public opinion. So that's the main core issue, why track 2 dialogue and the people-to-people exchange, particularly the young people, exchanges between our two countries are important.
And would you say that for particularly the think tank world, you just mentioned that, do you think that 2024 is going to be a very good opportunity window for us think tank people? Because it seems like we are not bound by domestic politics and we can still talk to each other, even when domestic politics are at higher stake in the U.S. and in China now.
I think this year it's a good opportunity for our two chapter dialogue mechanisms, particularly Steve Owens, Mr. Steve Owens and I initiated the chapter dialogue on maritime issues. That mechanism, we have involved the discussion on issues, maritime issue, international law for more than 10 years. So we will continue such a kind of chapter dialogue, because correct understanding of the other side and cognizance of the other side and objective, accurate judgment of other side's strategic intentions are the prerequisites for both competition and cooperation between China and the United States. Even in the case of a confrontation, there should be a clear assessment of other side's motives and the cause and effect relationship of its actions. So, as a matter of fact, many U.S. policies and measures towards China are based on exaggerated Chinese strategic intentions or illusory assumption. For example, the assertion that China is the only country with will and ability to challenge the hegemony of the United States is, highly, typical case. It is a miscalculation on China. So, in this sense, I think chapter dialogue, people-to-people exchanges should be, encouraged in the coming years, particularly this year's, under the context of the U.S. election.
It seems like there will be a lot of clearing up of intentions, clearing up of misunderstanding, and also building people-to-people bond, and also talking about how to prevent crisis in the South China Sea that we can expect during this year's Tractate Dialogue. As we come into an end of our interview, let me just do a little game that I did with Professor Gordon Holden last year. From your perspective, Dr. Wu, from a Chinese perspective, tell me, what do you think that the Chinese people would generally like about the United States, and what the Chinese people that generally dislike about the United States? And what do you think that, is there anything, can be, you can start from a policy perspective or non-policy perspective. What do you think, if the US does something that will get a lot of thumbs up from China?
Well, it's hard to say in one or two sentences. I think now United States adopted a wrong policy towards China. If we look at the policies or potential bills that might be passed towards the Chinese, high-tech companies operating in the United States, TikTok. I just saw the news this morning, Fox News. Majority of U.S. young generations, like TikTok. What's the real reason why United States will, pass a ban on TikTok operating in the United States? Or EV, electric vehicles, it's, now politicized issue. EV is a vehicle. Tesla in China, majority of Chinese, EV market occupied by Tesla. Does China adopt a policy to ban Tesla selling in China, operating in China? No. So why United States, treat Chinese, high-tech companies unfairly? So it's a real problem. So I think it's a real misunderstanding, miscalculation, misjudgment on China of U.S. politicians. So as the two big countries, two largest economies, China and United States, should work together peacefully and treat each other fairly. So many Chinese young generations have their desire to, have their studies in the United States, to universities, colleges, but now it's likely that the United States was, unwelcomed Chinese young generation to study in the United States. I think it's another missed strategy taken by United States. So people to people exchange. I personally got advanced studies in 1990s in the United States. I learned a lot from the United States. The system of higher education and operation of think tanks, and even the community communications. So I think China should learn much from the United States. On the other hand, United States should learn more or realize the reality of China, so avoid misunderstanding, particularly misjudgment. So we still try our best to find a way to be respectful, try to stay together peacefully and friendly, even friendly, like 1970s, 1980s. I really enjoy that time, the relationship between our two countries. I still remember that. I still have a good memory on my first visit to the United States. Just last year, the pilots of Fly Tiger, you remember Fly Tiger?
Yeah.
The veteran pilots invited by China, the end of last year, they visited Beijing. One, veteran pilot says, although we have different governments, as a human being, we hope live in a peaceful and a prosperous world, like in a way, like our fathers did. And we all want to raise our families in a peaceful world. So as a people, as a normal people, ordinary people, Chinese people and US people, we really want to live together peacefully, friendly.
Well, it seems like we're ended up on a very uptick note. I think I very much agree with everything you said, sir. I think the two countries need to give each other opportunity to study, the opportunity to learn, the opportunity to grow, and most importantly, the opportunity to live. Thank you again, Dr. Wu, for taking our interview.
Okay.
You can view our past ICAS Experts Voices initiative on our website. Thank you again, Dr. Wu, and wish our audience have a good day.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you very much. I hope to see you. Bye.
Bye.